With us now, the journalist and former Labour Special Advisor Catherine MacLeod, Shona Craven, who's a columnist for The National, and STV's political editor Colin Mackay. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Colin, talk of a Cobra meeting tomorrow and a four-nation approach. Is it your assessment that that's realistic?
I think it's, to some degree, almost essential. It's something that the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, obviously is going to be looking towards, because something that she's complained about is that she doesn't have the money to support things like the furlough scheme, for example. So if there's going to be any economic benefits tomorrow to compensate some of the hospitality industry, for example, we heard, as you mentioned there, the Prime Minister talking about closing the pubs slightly earlier, that kind of thing. I wouldn't think there'd be any compensation for that, but if there's anything else there, then they'd be looking for the UK Treasury to compensate industries in Scotland there. And, she knows she doesn't have the resources for that. So I think that's one of the key reasons why not just her, but Mark Drakeford in Wales and also Arlene Foster in Northern Ireland, they'll be looking to the UK government to see what they're doing. The thing is, at the moment, they don't actually know what's coming up at that Cobra meeting. They don't know what's going to be in the Prime Minister's statement tomorrow. So they don't know what they can promise because they don't know what he's going to promise. And
Catherine, how do you think the UK government and the Scottish government are handling this crisis?
Well, I think that it's probably not disputed at all that the UK government haven't handled it very well, that they've been sent from the outset, Boris Johnson has been sending out very mixed messages. I think actually the political class have failed, that they've failed to be able to speak as one voice. There shouldn't be party politics. It shouldn't be one nation against another nation. We're living in, sort of nearly a war-like situation. And it is a real shame that the four nations haven't been able to speak from the same page.
And Shona, much been made of Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, being a better communicator throughout this crisis. But nonetheless, the facts are that Scotland isn't performing much better, if at all, than the rest of the UK.
Yeah, I think there is. I think people acknowledge that. I don't think you hear a lot of people saying, Scotland's got a handle on COVID thanks to Nicola Sturgeon. It is a communication issue. And it's also just a sort of a matter of tone when you're wanting people to kind of come on board with what you're proposing. Nicola Sturgeon's been talking about creating a virtuous spiral, kind of encouraging people to do the right thing rather than using these sticks rather than carrots, which could have unintended consequences. For example, if people think they have to self-isolate and they won't get support, they might not go for a test. So it's about creating the will for people to all be in this together. And I think that's a really important tone to set at this really crucial moment where people really might be quite resistant to the idea of return to some form of lockdown. So I think communication is really going to be key tomorrow for both leaders, or all four leaders rather.
And Catherine, on that point about public acceptance, we went through the lockdown back in the spring. Will the public be generally more accepting if there are further restrictions, or are you getting a feeling that people have had enough of it?
I think quite a lot of people have had enough of it. I think it has been complicated because there have been so many mixed messages that it could have been simplified. I think people are genuinely confused. And I think at the beginning, when there was the first lockdown, I think people had accepted it. I think now because they don't understand what is happening, and nobody has really explained to them. We're now getting late in the day that there is to be a balance to be struck between the economic hit that the country is going to take and dealing with the virus. And I think people want to understand what is happening, and they can understand it if they are given the true situation. And I don't think very many of us have been anywhere, because the politicians, I don't blame the politicians in some ways, because it's a huge responsibility. They must be very scared. They will all be wanting to do the right thing, but they have got to take the people with them in a situation like this. It's grim.
We're into political party conference season. It's a Labour conference at the moment. Normally you'd be there. Are you missing it?
Not in the slightest. Someone asked me this the other day and I'm thinking, no, I can go to my own bed and I don't have to go out drinking with people that you only want to see maybe once a year at the very most. I'm not missing it. I'm not missing the hangovers at all.
And Shona, is there any point in it?
In having the virtual conferences?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Not the boozing. No. I was
it's a very, very different thing, and it may, prompt people to ask, well, what is actually the point of all these people travelling and, at cost to members to go along, and particularly if they're not able to.
Well, we've lost Shona temporarily, but Catherine, it's the first conference for Sir Keir Starmer as party leader, and usually that's a big event, and they can make their message, make themselves known to everybody, and he's not getting that opportunity.
He's not. It'll be very interesting to see what he has to say tomorrow. And first of all, I'm very disappointed in Colin Mackay. I was always very pleased to see him at the conferences and all the other.
I wasn't talking about you, Catherine. Absolutely
it's okay,
not.
Colin. Anyway, it will be a big moment for Keir Starmer. He's done well so far. Because it's been quite hard for him to find his voice, to find an audience, because his virus has been all-encompassing. He's done well at, say, Prime Minister's questions. He's now got to do well amongst the general public, and he's got to be able to break through and let people know what he's about and what he stands for.
Well, the Scottish Labour leader, Richard Leonard, was speaking at the weekend, and part of the problem has been that he doesn't have a lot of public recognition. And actually, it appears that even some of his own party, the party's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, didn't even know who he was. Here's what she said.
Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Richard Leonard, our leader in Scotland. Richard.
So, Richard Lennon, Colin, that wouldn't have gone down well.
No, it won't. I know how he feels. The number of things I turn up at and they say, oh, I'm sorry, you're not John Mackay, how disappointed we are. So I get that all the time. But Angela Rayner introduced this.
Let me get out of my lawn.
Angela Rayner introduced this session with the nations and regions as the Glastonbury of politics. It's pretty clear that Richard Leonard wasn't the headline act. I mean, she introduced others like Mark Drakeford, Sadiq Khan, Andy Burnham, the mayor in Manchester. She knew them all really, really well. But Richard Leonard was clearly the one that she didn't know. Thankfully, they were actually mercifully short speeches. They only got to make 3-minute speeches each, which is much shorter than you would usually have to sit through a party conference. And he did have something to say. He was calling for a targeted furlough scheme in Scotland. He said that's what he would want to introduce, but obviously he wouldn't be able to introduce something like that unless Labour were in power in Westminster. And it's 4 years before there's another Westminster election, probably.
And Shona, was it just a slip of the tongue, or do you think that, as I say, that's a problem Richard Leonard faces?
I think it's definitely a problem that Richard Leonard faces. I do feel a little bit of sympathy for Richard Leonard. He's just not really managed to break through very successfully. I do think it's good, incidentally, that these speeches have been cut down. If you remove all the applause that everyone has to provide on cue at these conferences, maybe that's the length that the speeches actually were meant to be to begin with. So I think these sessions have been a bit awkward and a bit stilted, and perhaps Keir Starmer, with his training as a lawyer, will be a bit more of a showman and kind of just look into the camera and really address the membership. This slogan.
Do you know, I don't think he has to address the membership tomorrow. I think he has to address the country at large. He has to address the UK audience, because this is one of the benefits potentially of this virtual conference, is that they don't actually have to talk to the membership at all. I mean, given that Keir Starmer's on tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I can't imagine that there's going to be that many people watching it live. So it's only going to be what is then reported on the news, and that's the key audience for him. There is the wider electorate. This is his chance to be known after tomorrow. And
very briefly and finally, exams in Scotland. Shona, a big debate over whether the exam should be held next year or not. How do you think that's going to play out?
I'm inclined to think it will play out in a way that gives the teachers as much certainty as possible, because I think that's what really has upset teachers, not knowing what's going to happen. And I sympathise with John Swinney having to make these calls. I think a lot of people thought it was great that we were getting the pupils back into the classroom, but a lot of teachers were pretty angry that they hadn't had much time and much notice. So I think it's good. It seems on the face of it good to have that as plan A and other forms of assessment as plan B, but I'm not sure teachers are very happy with this being asked to kind of ride two horses at the one time. So if Swinney wants to get back in the good books of the teachers, I think the certainty option, which would have to be not having the exams, given the restrictions currently on gathering and the fact that they all have to sit them simultaneously. So I'm inclined to think that they might be cancelled, which is what the Scottish Greens want. But to be fair, the Scottish Conservatives do make very compelling arguments for trying to keep that as plan A and try to go for as much certainty and normality as possible. So I can definitely see it from both sides.
And very briefly and finally, Colin, how do you think it's going to fall? Where will John Swinney decide to go?
I think the way he's being pulled and pushed at the moment means that at the moment he's looking at going in both directions. I think Nat 5s could be cancelled, that could be continued assessment, and I think that the hires, he'll pull out all the stops to try and make sure that the hires take place next year. And I think that's the key for him, because that's what parents and that's what the kids will want.
Well, Catherine, we were going to come to ask you about you and Colin at the conferences, but unfortunately time has beaten us to it. But thank you all for joining us on the Monday Night Panel.
It's too early.